Well, hey guys, how's it going this week? It's a Tuesday, 4-day week.
Woo!
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I think what happened is the way I found out about Labor Day is the way I often find out about Labor Day is and other days is I tried to schedule some meetings during that, and my interlocutors told me that's a holiday. So I was glad it was a surprise. It was a surprise holiday that I had.
Except for all my London coworkers who were trying to send me invites. It's like, nope.
Oh,
Coach,
ah.
I'm a little shocked Kim doesn't, remind you of those. I would think she'd be on top of that.
Well,
Am I
I think
misreading that?
I think there was a bit of over optimism on her part here. Like, because I kind of walked in on Friday and I was like, hey, did you know I have Monday off? And she looked at me kind of funny. She was like, yes? So she knew, but I didn't know. So I think there's a bit of
Do,
recalculating that needs to go on with our administrative
do you
FIBA.
have like the family calendars and stuff on iCal?
Well, Matt Ray, it's interesting you should bring that up because the way that you run your calendaring system in Ray Partners LLC
Yeah.
is quite the envy of half of Cote Casa or Casa del Cote, which is you, I understand, are fully digitized. You're a digital family, right?
Um, yeah. So I guess when you say fully digitized, I for those uninitiated, I have three kids and a dog. Well, we
All
used to have a
robots.
dog. Yeah. And everyone has a calendar. The house has a calendar. There's a
Hmm.
family calendar. My wife and I both have calendars. Throw in the TripIt calendar feed, and plus the work calendars. I think I have like 14 on my phone.
All of the Google Apps domain lordsofcomputing.com, right?
Not currently, not currently. That may have lapsed.
Oh, that might have slipped. I wonder if I still own that. I'll have to go look that up. Well, what we have, Matt Ray, is I have a digital calendar for myself, my work, and then the rest of my family has a paper calendar. And what I need to do is train a webcam on it so that I can keep up to date on it.
There might be a service for that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just the paper calendar works for my wife. It's what she likes.
Yeah, except when you get those like texts and it's like, hey, I want to do something, or hey, we're supposed to see somebody for dinner, and I'm like, whatever, put it on the calendar, and you have to go read paper.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's the paper hole. It's a problem. Yeah, and I tried to invite her to things like TripIt. She's not interested. She's not interested in this whole life hacking, optimize your life with computers business.
Well, yeah.
That's my domain.
Well, doesn't she like want to know where you are and stuff?
Yeah, but then she can just ask me.
She just writes it down on paper.
Yeah, it's just by courier.
She's got a handful of post-it notes today.
Although she did point out that there's apparently some app by that Miranda Joy person, and by I mean she's just in the press. I don't know what her involvement is. That it's basically like you can send a message to the app, and it will send like a singing telegram, a person to deliver the message for you, which sounds delightful. So
Okay.
so speaking of computers improving our world, Matt Ray and I were in lovely San Francisco for VMworld last week, I
Yeah.
believe. And it was quite a hullabaloo, quite a big deal.
Yeah, that
A lot
that was
going
the
on there.
that was the largest. That might be the largest cat conference I've ever been to.
So last episode, which was recorded the week before last, we kind of had this open-ended question. What exactly is VMware's cloud, right? Because as I was noting, when we do our surveys at 451 Research, like VMware is always the top cloud people are using, and so it has always made me wonder, well, what does that mean exactly? So do you think you got an understanding of what VMware's cloud was, Matt Ray? I think you already knew, and you gave us a
Well,
good answer.
yeah, yeah.
Digital
So
cloud?
actually, um, I gave a talk on the newly rechristened vCloud Air,
Uh-huh.
um, and how it relates to vSphere, and I get how it all works. I mean, vCloud Air, yeah, I guess that's cloudy. I mean, it's a publicly hosted cloud. We'll call it that. But vSphere is like that's not a cloud. That's virtualization in a cluster, and the self-service thing is what's kind of missing there.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could write this report that I really need to write. that goes over exactly that, because in addition to, we'll see if we get to it, in addition to spending much of my time looking into CompuWare, don't fall asleep today, I tried to kind of sort out the pile of information I have about VMware now, right? And I think that you very quickly identified the missing pieces. I'm still not quite sure what the self-service angle is, right? So if I were to sit down a developer who had been using AWS or Rackspace or whatever, your soft layers, I don't know, and shift them over to VMware, insert new name here, it would be interesting to see their reaction and how things would work out. And I'm not, I don't know how that transition would happen.
Well, I'm that guinea pig.
I know.
Right.
So is there a self-service portal, Matt Ray?
So vCloud Air has one. You have a quota. So it's more like, I guess I would contact a salesperson to make my quota bigger. So that's not exactly cloudy. Right. And I don't buy it by the node. I buy it by the data center. So I buy a bunch of I buy quotas of CPUs and memory and storage.
Right.
And then I carve it up however I like.
Now that sounds like the old VSPP or VPSS, I forget, the service provider program that they had. That the way a service provider would buy a cloud is they buy chunks of compute that they then resell out. But is it really the same for an individual? Like you have to buy blocks of resources, not just nodes?
Yes. And I'm willing to bet it's the same code.
And you use vCloud Director essentially to do that stuff, right? Isn't Director the thing? And then their Dynamic Ops acquisition, which is renamed vCloud Automation Center, right? VCAC or VCAC as they like to say.
Which got renamed.
Yes, that was renamed to it was subsumed in. Hold on, this gets too big. So anyway,
four things to think about in VMware world, right? ESXi, your hypervisor,
vSphere,
the golden goose.
Yeah.
vSphere, that's number 2.
Okay.
vSphere, and vSphere has vCenter, which is like their management dashboard, but vSphere is the bigger thing. Until last week, I had those flipped in my head.
You had vSphere and vCenter flipped in your head.
Yeah.
Now, what does vSphere do again?
vSphere is like the clustered ESX hypervisors. Just that whole clustered virtualization thing.
Okay. Are you taking notes, Brandon? Because I'm going to need to read these back.
No, I'm prepared to ask the follow-up question.
Okay. So let me do an analogy. So ESXi is like KVM.
Yes.
Or Docker, right? And it's a container in which programs run. And then vSphere is a little bit like that thing I can't pronounce. It's cluster management, like Kubernetes or whatever. So
bigger.
You've got a cluster of individual virtualized nodes, and vSphere manages your workloads across them. And that's maybe where vMotion rests, where you can magically move things around. And it's where the power of your disaster recovery, which, am I the only one who it seems like VMware's the main person who's obsessed with disaster recovery? Like, they're always going over that. They love that stuff.
Yeah.
Probably for good reason. Okay, so we got that.
Yeah.
Then vCenter operations, vCops. Is that what it's called?
So my understanding is that you had a whole bunch of management tools, and I think they have a management BU, like a business unit, and I believe that is all lopped into vRealize. It's just kind of you're going to need to do stuff with your vSpheres and all the things they talk to, and and that is just.
Now I had a chart prepared for this moment in our play here, Matt Ray, but I seem to have closed it. But you're right.
Okay.
In vRealize, you've got VCAC, right? Then they've moved vCenter operations in there, I think, and then there's also Log Insight, right? And then there's ITB, the business stuff, doing cost accounting and financials and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's also a fair amount of roadmappery going on of basically they're gonna collapse everything in all of your cloud and systems management into the vRealize suite.
Yeah, yeah, and so there's probably a bunch of sales guys who are, probably every time they have a VMworld, they lose SKUs as like, V things disappear because they just become part of other products. So like application director, I don't know where that went, but it's in there somewhere.
Yes. Now, what was App Director?
So App Director was like a blueprint builder. So I demoed that at ChefConf.
And how does that relate to like Chef and Puppet? Is that the same thing or something different?
So Application Director has this idea of blueprints for deploying application stacks.
Right.
And so to them, Chef and Puppet are just like Bash++. It's like a little config management checkbox. Like you put in your little, instead of, you put in your chef recipe and it configures the box. And then it manages how all the boxes talk to each other and how they all get deployed.
And is there anything that does that in the Chef and Puppet DevOpsy world? Is that
Yes.
this missing orchestration layer that people are always going on about? No.
No. So, to me, the thing that they fall into this big stack of cloud management platforms. There's a lot of them, and they're kind of like the post-virtualization baby steps towards the cloud, right? You're still clicking on things. You're still like, I'm going to click, 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 and I get my apps, and they deploys little stacks of apps. But your knowledge and your usage of configuration management is very slim.
So these are the demos that you see that are a GUI, and you're like, I'm deploying an application, and I'm going to drag my mouse over to connect a MySQL thing. Oh, and now it needs a load balancer, so I'll drag this over here.
Yeah.
This is kind of the child of what we used to call service modeling. Last seen with Microsoft's Dynamic System Initiative, and it all just kind of like piffled into the air.
Cloud. And every large vendor has one.
Right.
And the enterprise people, that's what you sell them. You sell them the GUIs and the clickies, and it's hard to differentiate in that market because every single vendor has one. Right. If you try to make your play like, oh, we interact well with other clouds, well then, so like when VMware bought Dynamic Ops, it kind of merged into this, orchestrator tool that played well with EC2 or AWS and other clouds, and that's still there. And so they play that up, depending on who you're talking to.
Right.
So
it all makes look fresh off the press. This just in, I found the diagram. Let me share it with you guys. It's from one of their white papers. You see that? Boom.
Boom.
There's the VMware vRealize suite from a public document there. I always get all these briefings and stuff. I'm always afraid I'm going to reel some NDA thing, but here's a public document. You can see underneath you've got the raw infrastructure. It's pointing to infrastructure. Good stuff, right?
Oh, see, it even says vRealize Cloud Management Platform.
Yeah, see, and you can see all the components in there. And I remember when I got pre-briefed on this a couple weeks ago, I saw this diagram. I was like, this is great, right? Like, there's no product names in here. It's just function, like going over all the functional areas.
But see, all those probably at one point were separate products.
Oh yeah, absolutely. and
all glued together with soap.
To recap on that, the other thing when I was talking about this, ironically for me playing so dumb about all of this, like I've actually been briefed on 3 separate occasions on all of this, and so it's sort of like an absurd performance artistry to go over how confusing it still is. But what was interesting in talking with them about this transformation into vRealize is I was listening to the words they were saying, and I realized what they were doing is describing like a microservices approach to things, right? So basically they were saying, hey, we've got this gigantic suite of stuff, as Matt Ray was just kind of walking through. And what we're doing is kind of systematically refactoring, and I use that word very strategically rather than rewriting. We're refactoring things into a bunch of little services that just connect together. And you'll start to see them popping up here and there, right? Like, I'll just pick one at random here to be an example, right? Like, I don't know, cost visibility, right? So, in this grand scheme that they're talking about, we've got this service that does all the cost visibility stuff, and you'll see it pop up as a plugin over here in vSphere, and it'll pop up as a plugin in the vRealize Air Suite. And then I was like, "Are you talking about like microservices stuff?" And then a completely different voice busts into the briefing, like the tech guy they had, and he's like, "Yes." Like, and we're breaking we're breaking it up into these small services and like this different approach on things so that we
with
can
just the top half of his head.
Yeah, exactly. But it was and to be fair, I think this. Let me bring it up again because I love using the Google work technology here, as we now know we're supposed to call it. I think this is like a multi-year vision that everything will corral into this sort of state, if you will. But the whole point is to decouple the stuff and get it into, I don't know, more components that are easier to build together. And as I told them, if you can do all of that without anyone ever saying the phrase Tivoli framework, you'll probably do okay. Just do not program it in Corba, and things will come out fine.
Well, right. So that ties into one of the posts that I linked to in the show notes there from Matt Rock about why can't we have nice things in automation?
Yeah. Yeah. You want to give a summary of that overview in your own personal experience, Matt Ray?
Well, so I gave my talk, and there was a good audience there, and everyone seemed to enjoy it. But afterwards, I talked with the author of this post. The title is "Dear VMware, please give us nice things to automate the things." And I was kind of complaining about the state of APIs and the SDKs, and I had made similar comments, and he has a very nice post about all the gaps, how things are getting stale, how things are getting kind of stale. That's the right word.
And he had good proof points about dates that things were lasting.
Very thorough. And but what was nice was someone at VMware actually followed up with him on Twitter, and one of the people he called out in the post said, hey, here's, follow me, DM me, I'll get you. Let's sort this out. So, hopefully things will get better. I talked to a lot of VMware users while we were at VMworld, and I was right on in my initial impression that it's crufty and stale, and people were like, oh, but we're used to it, and everyone uses VMware. It was kind of the answer. So doubling down on it.
Yeah, it'd be like eating tortilla chips without salsa, and suddenly someone introduces salsa to you, and you're like, holy crap, I've been doing it wrong this whole time.
So then, guys, what was your take on this whole VMware OpenStack integration? Like does that bridge the gap between these kind of different worlds, or is that just another one of the many announcements that came out last week?
I don't know. I mean, well, that was kind of the complaint of the article, is just like, it's hard to integrate with VMware. I mean, it obviously didn't stop. There were like 270 booths there, but somebody's obviously integrating with them, but they don't make it easy. And integrating into OpenStack, if you throw enough body count at it, I guess you can make it happen. It's painful dealing with those SOAP APIs and SDKs that are poorly maintained.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't dug enough into the technical details to know if the following is true, but I am an analyst, so why should that stop me? My impression is I talked about this on the new Stack podcast I was on last week too, where you can see me embarrass myself with my lack of knowledge on other parts of last week. But it was essentially like, I think there's two ways of looking at OpenStack. Not to open a can of worms, but like one of them is like a chunk of code that is a cloud, right? Like all the way down to the metal. Here's a bunch of code, and it's got APIs on top of it. And the other way of looking at it is it's like, oh, it's just a spec, right? Like this is a specification just like J2EE. And as long as you implement the APIs, I don't care how you implement them, right? And I think what I'm interested in from my observing from the sidelines position is VMware's position, as I understand it, is basically the second. OpenStack is just a spec. And they're like, hey, if you want OpenStack, we'll just layer that on top, and then it goes all the way down to ESXi, as Matt Ray was saying.
Yeah, definitely.
All we're doing is wrapping a wafer thin. It's probably not wafer thin. It's probably club sandwich thick, like a sandwich thick API layer on top of the VMware cloud, as we were kind of joking around about earlier. and you can interact with it like OpenStack. And it's like, you guys will remember this. It's basically like duck typing, right? Like if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it must be an OpenStack cloud. And so I think that's kind of the approach that they're taking. And again, not being like a I don't know, in any of the various orthodoxies of OpenStack, sounds great. Let's see if that works.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree with that. I mean, over the last, 9 OpenStack summits, what are we on? Like I, J, K, Kilo, right? So there has been like, oh, we have to write this code, and we're all going to fit into this API and collaborate, and we're all writing the code. And I'm starting to, I've talked to a couple of different people who are, they're taking that OpenStack API and putting them on completely different stacks of software.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and we had over beers at VMworld, there was people were like, yeah, VMware is not going to fix their APIs. Let's just get them to adopt this OpenStack one, and we'll use that instead.
Right. Which is the question you were asking, Brandon. Maybe that is a
Well, here's the diagram.
more efficient route.
I was going to say I shared the diagram that they put up, and it kind of looks like a mapping, but I guess the part where it gets confusing is, sure, you can make the OpenStack run on VMware infrastructure, but then the management is sort of, there's just arrows. So like, what does that mean? Like what? Because if that's the gap you're trying to to Matt Ray's earlier point, like people know VMware and that's what they like, and you can manage it that way. That's sort of a bridge to OpenStack, which then I think probably addresses all the automation needs by that blog post, right? In a more realistic way than, I don't know, is VMware ever going to get to the point that all these APIs are truly updated the way that some of these guys expect it? That seems like a pretty daunting task.
Yeah. Well, what's the OpenStack component that's the UI, Matt Ray? It's not Keystone. That's the identity.
Horizon.
Yeah. Well, they don't have a basically they layer on top the lower level things there, your compute, storage, image, and networking, and then strip out the UI and put their own UI in place.
But like a proper API-driven stack, Horizon's just a consumer of the API.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's meant to be replaceable with other dashboards, and so some of the other OpenStack vendors out there have completely different dashboards.
Yeah. So this will be exciting when in the next OpenStack summit. I'll actually have some framing for the usual conversations that come up, and one of them will be like, "Are we just a spec?" That would be great. I love it. It'll be better than do we need a benevolent dictator, which is kind of like a boring discussion that comes up every time.
Right, and there's the constant struggle in OpenStack of like, is it the software or is it the APIs?
Yeah. Huh.
And when you see diagrams like that, where you're like, well, it's not the software for us. No.
Yeah, but that could fix the issue that you're speaking of, Brandon, in the way like, well, if you want proper APIs, they just use OpenStack APIs, which would be quite the statement.
Yeah, and those are kind of becoming like the other standard API that you interact with. It's like, well, you have AWS or you use the OpenStack one, and the OpenStack one is Apache license, so you can do whatever you want with it.
So it's interesting for VMware then, is like going forward, it's like they have that choice of, do they write their own, which promotes lock-in, which is probably maybe better for their business, but a lot of work, very hard to maintain, very hard to get adopted, or do they kind of go to the open source or the if you will de facto standards, which kind of seems like just totally unclear. My guess is like the API stuff is like going to get it just sort of will get no love from VMware because it's not what drives buyers, which is sort of unfortunate, right? Which is why there's always going to be frustration in the developer community.
Yeah, and the frustration is when they talk about things like the software-defined data center without APIs or without maintained APIs.
Yeah. There was a good post from Lydia Leong at Gartner where we'll put a link to it in show notes. Where at the end, I tweeted it back on the analyst day, but she had this point of like, well, developers matter, right? I mean, as a way of summing up the API thing, right? And she was saying at Gartner, they what did she call it? Bimodal IT. There's sort of there's the old style of doing IT, and then, as she called it, the agile style of doing IT, right? I think IDC calls it like a third platform or something. Like everyone has their phrase for this kind of stuff. But it is, VMware's customer base is that first mode where they don't really need APIs. and it's not really a concern. But as ever, it seems like the reason for doing cloud is not really to run your packaged software and your normal IT stuff, but it's to run new stuff that developers have written. And to that point, as Matt Ray was saying, right? Like if you're going to have an SDDC or software-defined data center, whether you call it a coding business or a cloud or whatever phrase you want to use, like I think developers are like the primary like chum in the engine that gets the sharks of your customers to come and eat you. That one didn't work out, but you get the idea.
I heard they were the kingmakers.
Yeah, the kingmaker. I think that the developers are the fuel for all this stuff, and if they're like if they're not happy with the 2012 APIs that you haven't updated in GitHub for a long time, then something's wonky there. But when I would discuss this topic with VMware people, they seem pretty. I wouldn't say they were pretty aware of it, but they were like, "Oh, right, yeah, that's definitely something we need to do." Like, I think they're coming around to that. On the other hand, like there were some more senior executives. There was an interesting contrast. A lot of the analyst day that we had on Monday was like, it was in this is terrible when people do this, but it was like this NDA, and sometimes we remember to tell you what's NDA, and sometimes we don't. So it's sort of like, well, I guess I can't use any of this because I don't know what's NDA and not NDA. But there was some discussion from various senior executives. It was this contrast of having people come up and tell you about the shiny new things and how great that was, and then the more senior executives came up and they to brutally summarize what they said, it was kind of like, yeah, all of this stuff is nice, but it's probably like low double single digits % of revenue for the next 5 years of us. So we're just going to keep to our knitting, where all the money comes from. Like again, that was an idea expressed over like a 30-minute Q&A period, but it was sort of, it was the old saw that all of us have heard. We're like, I go visit lots of customers and they never ask me for this, right? And instead they just ask us for sort of incremental returns on what they have already, which is fair. It's just, not to use another word, it's not very fascinating.
But to your point, Coach, I think you tweeted out something like, something to the effect of VMware needs developer relations to kind of deal with posts like that. And I think, so if we're in the VMware strategy meeting, I think one recommendation maybe is like get it, like continue to kind of like go incrementally improve VMware, but then don't like if nothing else, don't introduce any new APIs, right? Wrap yourself around, and to some degree, I think they're doing this with OpenStack or the AWS or whatever. And that doesn't take a ton of funding, but just embrace those APIs, which will slowly build the developer community. So even if it doesn't, if you will, from like a business point of view, you'd say like that's protecting a flank, right? If that becomes the next huge thing, at least you can ride with it. And if it doesn't, well, then it's probably just incremental improvements that make a whole bunch of developers happy, and kind of keep you fueling your engine.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's like to put it in even briefer terms, VMware doing developer relations is an extremely cheap hedge, right? Like if that turns out to be a thing, it kind of costs them nothing relative to anything else to fix most of the things that Matt dude was talking about, and ongoing like make him and others happy.
Yeah, but anecdotally, I heard like most of those people went to the Pivotal spin-out.
Yeah. I mean, that was the other nice thing that all of us analysts like to jab VMware for. That Lydia had at the end of her post. She was like, and then they divested of Pivotal. Publish. Like it is like it's still an oddity of how the EMC Federation decided to rearrange itself, but whatever. Big companies. You do anything else exciting at VMworld, Matt Ray?
Well, I went. I talked to a lot of people. Had a lot of meetings. We had our business development offsite. Strategized, strategery. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing. I ended up talking to two. I had two meetings, as it were. One of them was at the Puppet Party, just over a bunch of beers, but with VCE people. And I've never really dug into VCE too much, but they're kind of a fascinating company. I don't really know them well enough to know how they're doing or things like that, but they seem sort of like the Apple of servers. Like they have like very well done, expensive servers, and it's interesting. Like it's just sort of interesting context for we're kind of going over meta level stuff every now and then. Like whenever you listen to a VCE person, like you should count the seconds it takes for them to say things like return on investment and TCO and things about justifying a high upfront cost, if you will, which sort of suggests a strategy that they have, that we're going to charge a lot of money up front, but you're going to be able to talk with the CFO about justifying it because you're going to get a return on your money very quickly, which is an exciting thing to worry about if you're going to do that kind of sales.
I mean, but wasn't VCE kind of born out of the Cisco VMware EMC partnership thing, and now they all hate each other again, and now like VMware had their rocks, or what did they call their
EVO rail?
Yeah, the rail thing where they have specs on how to do converged storage, CPU, and networking, and run VMware product on top of that. And isn't that going after VCE?
Exactly. That was the exciting VCE chatter. Was like, oh, it looks like the V, the C, and the E in VCE are not necessarily cooperating too well. So there you go.
Yeah.
We'll see how that pans out.
Well, and that was what was the 451 guy talking about? Cisco's view of virtualized networking versus VMware's view of software-defined networking.
Yeah.
Or did I get those flipped?
Yeah. That was Peter Christie at the 451 breakfast, which you
that was pretty good.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. It was fun. I had to step out during the networking thing, which is tragic because I thought I would finally understand what SDN is. But maybe I can call up Peter and have him give me the presentation. He was on a nice tear of what was happening there. I like that. So speaking of like ponderous APIs that don't work very well and new ways of doing them, you had a bunch of stuff on crowdsourced analysts, Brandon, and you and I have talked about this on and off over the years, kind of like interesting models there. What do you see going? How are you observing the industry analyst world changing, or trying to disrupt itself with some crowdsourced analysis?
Yeah, well, I think I've been following these three companies, and I guess when you have three, you have sort of a category to follow, at least in my mind. And I think there's like many people have tried. I think when people think about analysts, they usually start with Gartner, and then they kind of like register all the typical complaints about Gartner and say, we're going to change it all. So three of them I've run across. One of them is WiseGate IT, which is like I kind of put them as like the highly hard to get in club that allows you to like register, and they'll do some like different roundtables amongst like really high level executives about how they're deploying IT. So this is the idea that hey, if you're a CIO and you don't want to pay Gartner, you want to like just talk to people directly, then you could pay a bunch of money and kind of be part of that program. So you kind of have that. I almost feel like it's like the country club, the exclusive country club in the back room where they're going to tell you. And then they're based in Austin, and then you have another one here in Austin called Trust Radius, which is going the completely opposite direction. They've applied kind of the Yelp model for enterprise software. So it's kind of interesting to go on and see short reviews of enterprise software on Trust Radius. Highly recommend that if you just want to like see what it looks like, because obviously all these programs, all this enterprise software, are very difficult to understand. So to try to rate it very quickly is pretty tough. And then you have this other one called PureList, which frankly has the best name, I think. For anyone trying to disrupt the analyst, PureList seemed like a good name. And they're creating like a LinkedIn specifically for security professionals. So it's kind of interesting to see all of this. Again, I think it's all like a backlash primarily against Gartner. But I do think, I guess my primary observation is none of them embrace rankings. And everybody, at the end of the day, like everyone complains about all the rankings that are come out from different types of analyst vendors, but really in the end, everyone needs the rankings. So I kind of feel like none of them are really touching on like the reason people tend to go to really big analyst firms, and that's really to have some sense of rankings, even if they're wrong and they hate them. So that's, I guess, to me, like the missing gap. Like who's going to be the first one to publish a set of rankings, based on their data, which I think would be really interesting.
Yeah. Do you think like the Spiceworks community fits in here anyhow? Like it seems like
I should have thrown them in, right? Because they're like a whole nother like take on it. You're right, like a kind of like a big I don't know how would you just describe Spiceworks? It's like just a massive community of IT guys like
Yeah.
trading information, sort of like an analyst firm, but I guess it's curated, but not curated that much.
Yeah, it's slightly curated. Like every now and then they'll come up. I haven't checked in on the community part of it in a while, but every now and then they'll do something like here's cloud storage as a thing with the pie chart. Like it's curated is a good word. They'll kind of like identify things in various communities and kind of like clean them up and make them slightly more presentable, if you will. And it is a interesting and of course they also like they're basically just a big asset management thing for small and medium businesses. And so they have like, I don't know, however million or hundreds of thousands of just like stuff in their database that the people are running. So, in theory, they can do all sorts of like market share and trending on what people are actually using and what's airing out, which is interesting as well. I'm always trying to scuttle around and do stuff with them, but it's
Well, I
unfortunately.
saw on LinkedIn, I think their COO, their president COO, he posted a very cryptic update to LinkedIn that said something like, "We've crossed a threshold that very few companies ever do," which I think what he wants you to believe, I think, is they've crossed $100 million in revenue. Like I don't know if I'm not saying they did that, but like that was the tweet. I think was clearly kind of, or the LinkedIn update was clearly to make you think that. So, so they're
What
definitely.
fun.
They're certainly growing, right? I mean, it's sort of but I think in the end, like even them, I don't know, I'd be interested to get your take, Cote, around like at the end of the day, like it's sort of like what everyone knows, right? Everyone, you should go read the analyst reports. If you want to know what's going on, go read the analyst reports. But then but everyone then wants the rankings. So like, what's your take, like on like a
Yeah.
score 51? Like, do you get asked that a lot?
Oh
Like
yeah.
how do you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, we get a well, to give an overly long answer. So 451 has like four core customers, types of customers. We have vendors, financial industry people, service providers, and end users or enterprises. The people we're talking about here. And the first three people don't necessarily want to know rankings because their interest is, I guess service providers do for some software, but their interests are different than like ranking. Like vendors want to know competitive stuff and trends that they can make their products fit to, and then finance people want to know what good investments are and which ones are not good investments, right? And the number one thing may not always be the good investment. So you're more interested in the health of the company and stuff. And service providers want to know about other service providers and like different regions, and they want some ranking of software to use for their own. But it's the end users, the enterprises who want to know rankings of stuff, right? Because they're just like, I don't know, should I just install VMware again? Right? Like, so someone just tell me if. So what you're telling me is I should use Chef to run my global enterprise.
Yes.
Right. Right. And we know Matt Ray's answer to that, but it's sort of like I don't really have a lot of time to like do all of this stuff. That's what analysts do. And so what would be even better is if there was just like one of your favorites, Brandon, if there was just like a wire cutter of like enterprise software. Like, why don't you go out? I think this is what people assume analysts do. Why don't you go out and identify the first top 5 things, and then go out and test them, and then write up what happened and which one you would say is the best, right? Like I think that's
a CNET for enterprise software.
Like I was there was this window of opportunity where maybe we could buy a new DVD player, but it turns out that the wire was just not plugged in very well at the back, so we'll just stick with the one we have, right? Like we have the CFO here at Casa del Cote has a very strict policy on gadgets. Run them into the ground. So, so I did a little research on Blu-ray DVD players. So of course I went to the wire cutter, and they were like, "All right, if you want to spend $80, this is the best one you can buy. If you want to spend $300, this one is even more awesome, right? And if you and here's number 2, and why we made it number 2, and so." Again, I think that a lot of people assume that's what analysts do. And maybe some analysts do that and some analysts did it, but that's not what analysts do. Like, especially when it comes to enterprise software. I mean, just think about the resources and time you would have to actually do those tests, right? It's not like I can just go buy 10 cloud platforms, including that vRealize stuff, and, just install them and over, like, let's be generous, a month period tell you something.
Yeah.
right? Like you can't. There is no labs. There used to be labs because you would get like 5 3.5 floppy disks and you could install software and like do something with it. But you can't really do that with much of the software that people cover nowadays. So therefore, one way of ranking things, benchmarking, becomes near impossible or becomes a huge money loser. It's not profitable. I mean, technically you could do it, but it would take a long time and it's questionable how much money you could make off of it. So then you're like, all right, how else will we rank people? And that's, I guess you can rank people off of your intuition about how they're doing, what they tell you, their revenue, like momentum, right? So that's why analysts get obsessed with momentum and how many people are using it and things like that. And I think what's fascinating for me about crowdsourcing stuff is if you could figure out a way, and why I'm always obsessing about Spiceworks is that if you could figure out a way to make that a labs, right, that would actually be an interesting new source of data, right? Like if I asked 5 people how install of, let's keep picking on VMware, of the VMware cloud solution is going, that'll just be 5 people's input, and it'll be kind of weird. Right? But if I can ask like 100 people or 200 people or like 500 people, that starts to become a little more interesting and I would think more dependable than other ways of doing it.
I mean,
Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say that's what's nice about the various surveys that go around. If you get a good sample size, you can, the anecdote stuff gets paved over and actually becomes data.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't there some joke that the plural of anecdote is data?
Yeah.
So Cote, I think this is what I believe is the perfect 2x2 ranking metrics. It's like on one axis, it's market share, which you should be able to derive. Like you can get, you obviously have to ask private companies what they are, but as long as you don't disclose it, you just basically say, I'm going to rate you 1 on market share, and then the other one, I don't necessarily think it would take that long, but it would sort of be kind of boring work to certain groups of people, would be for a given category, I'm going to list like the 10 to 20 features that I think are necessary, right?
Yep.
And then once you have that, then I'm going to take that survey, I'm going to poll, enough people and ask them, okay, what solution to use?
Yeah.
And what's your satisfaction of these features? And that would be the other axis. So you'd sort of have like market share versus feature completeness, and then if you wanted, you
like,
kind of
breadth.
Yeah, and then it would just be, and of course, like people would argue, like all the vendors, and I'm sure I would be on the other side, would say like you left my feature out. But at the end of the day, like if you're really honest about like certain categories, like it does kind of come down to like a pretty known set of features. Like VMware, I think is pretty well understood. So I always thought like that would give you like a reasonably objective measure, right? To actually go out and say, okay, these are the features I care about. This is how much, and this is generally someone doing in that category. And then, of course, the consumer can use price themselves to determine, how much they're willing to pay for something.
No, I like that. And to close it out before we run out of time, I mean, I think there's a more abstract philosophical question, right? And I think, I think ranking things is important. Like it's because for that set of people, like it's good just to know like a definitive, like I have 2 minutes, tell me 1 to 3, right? I don't want a bunch of nuance. Just tell me like what fits. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't do a lot of ranking stuff. Unfortunately, there's not that many analysts who do rankings of stuff just because it's fraught with all sorts of problems. But it is nice.
Isn't that kind of how is it InfoWorld, the one that's always trying to send out free magazines? And TechTarget, they have all these articles and they give those away for free, magazines for free, subscriptions for free to get you to do those surveys. They can go and sell to various people, so they can say, hey, we have 20,000 IT professionals.
Yeah, and not to be my typical like commercially unaware person, right? But in 451 we've got a couple of survey bodies, and they don't do what Brandon was saying exactly, but they do a lot of what I would call, in a good way, sentiment analysis. So, are you using this product? Do you like this product? What are you planning on doing 6 months and 2 years? Like, what's the churn around these various types of products? And that's another way of, again, that kind of tells you what people are intending to use and what they're using, maybe not what the best is, right? But it is a way of deriving a ranking. Like I was saying at the beginning, VMware is always at the top of what people are currently using and what they're planning on using in a 2-year time horizon. And that information is actually very interesting, right? Like that's good stuff. And all the other analyst shops do stuff like this too, and each of them has their own way of doing that. That's right. So with that, why don't we go to our recommendations and then wrap up the show? How about we'll start with you, Matt Ray?
Okay. Well, I just finished reading Hugh Howey's Wool series, the first in a trilogy.
He's telling me it's all about wool.
It's not.
Damn it!
It's the standard post-apocalyptic story taking place in a silo, and I guess the wool is the wool over your eyes. Anyway, as soon as I finished it, I turned around and bought the next in the trilogy because I didn't know it was a trilogy going in.
So who wrote that?
So if you start digging into the stuff about Amazon self-publishing, this guy Hugh Howey is like the biggest selling guy, and he's always the guy they trot out. He's like, I became a millionaire doing this all by myself. So can you? So either he's got a good editor that he works with, or he's a pretty good writer. I mean, it was definitely much better than any self-published stuff I've seen.
Nice.
But yeah, it was top-notch sci-fi, good stuff.
How about you, Brandon?
Well, first I'll just say yes. Wool is awesome. I've read the whole trilogy. It's awesome, and he's actually have a new one out, Sand. So Matt Ray, when you finish that trilogy, you can start the next one. And then my recommendation this week is going to be another podcast. Is called Song Exploder. So check it out. You can find it on iTunes. And what this does is this guy basically interviews various bands and artists and has them kind of go through how they created a song. And it sounds. I have to say I'm not really a music guy, but the way it's sort of eye-opening. And for anybody that's into software, it's kind of interesting to see how people like layer together a song, like almost like they start with like the bass and then the drums and they add like vocals, and it's really fascinating. So like, I listened to this last episode, number 16. It was with Spoon. So if like a lot of times IT and computers is, I don't know, people that like music often like computers and vice versa. So if you're looking for something different to listen to, check out Song Exploder.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds good. Have you heard that one too, Matt Ray?
I have, and a little IT tech backstory. The lead singer for Spoon wrote video game music for a long time, and the drummer worked at AMD.
Wow. No wonder. I thought you were going to tell me they were chef users. That would be great.
Probably not. They're musicians now.
Yeah. Well, my recommendation is a combination recommendation and not recommendation, and that is last week I saw that Dropbox automatically upgraded you to a terabyte of space. So that's pretty awesome. I used to be at 100 gigs plus, the 5 or 10 gigs of miscellaneous space I've gotten for things like scratching my head while using it or something. They give you all these absurd things. But yeah, so that's fun. A terabyte of space is a lot. What I do not recommend is immediately when you find this out, dragging all of your photos to your Dropbox directory. That's not going to be good for you. Because so far I have not determined how I can figure out what's been uploaded and not uploaded so I can stop it instead of deleting it all. I guess I could log into the web UI and look, but we'll find out. So don't get too giddy with your terabyte of space.
Ease into it.
Yeah, just folder by folder. There you go. All right, well, with that's our software-defined talk podcast episode for this week. We were in the nicely listed in the DevOps Weekly. So if there's anyone new here, it's nice to be talking at you, as it were. And we're always at softwaredefinedtalk.com, and you can subscribe to the podcast feed by finding the RSS feed there or looking around in your various podcast apps and iTunes stores. We have the Software Def Talk there on Twitter. We're all over the place. So we'll see everyone next time.
Later.